Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram And Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of the upcoming mains examination. In the first article, we'll talk about the industrial disasters and the impact it has on human life, environment, and property. In the second article, we'll talk about the social issue of glass ceiling and the way forward to dealing with it. In the third article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the geophysical phenomena of glacial lakes outburst floods. In the fourth article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the religious conversions in India and the need of anti-conversion laws. In the fifth article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, New Space India Limited, and the Antrix Corporation. Finally, in the Prelims Snippets section, we'll have a discussion with respect to some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, coming to the very first article, it is about the industrial disasters. So what we have recently witnessed is that there has been a blast in one of the pharma's units in the Andhra's SEZ, that is Special Economic Zone, and that has claimed the life of more than 17 people. Now what you need to keep in mind is that just before a few days, we also had a similar incident in Dombivli where a boiler blast claimed the life of many people. Now this points towards the concern with respect to the industrial disasters in India and how to basically deal with them. Now this is a part of GS3 disaster management. Now see, industrial chemicals, they form the backbone of the modern industrial systems, and these chemicals, they contribute to around 7% to India's GDP, right? That is a substantial amount. What we see is that these industrial catastrophes, for example, the boiler blast which has taken place in Dombivli, or the same incident which has occurred in the pharma unit, they are relatively avoidable, right? But what happens is that once we have such kind of incidents, they halt the industrial progress, right? Next, they cause significant loss in terms of human life, property, loss to the environment, right, in terms of pollution which it does to the environment, right. Next, what we see is that according to the National Disaster Management Authority, almost 130 chemical disasters have taken place in India in the last 1 decade, and more than 300 people have lost their lives. Also, the National Disaster Management Authority has actually categorize various industries according to their disaster risks, and that is what we call as the major accident hazard units. So almost 1861 units are there, that is major accident hazard units in the country, which are prone to disasters across 301 districts in the country. Next, in addition, there are thousands of registered hazardous factories and unorganized sectors which have disaster risks. That is, they're prone to huge disasters. Now, what are the causes of industrial disasters in India? The first is the technical failures. What do you mean by that? What we see is that there is insufficient ventilation, or there is sort of poor quality material or poor quality processes which are involved in such some industries, which result into the sort of disasters happening in these industries. Then we have got human errors. What do we mean by human errors? That there is lack of seriousness when it comes to following the industrial protocols, when it comes to managing these storage systems, when it comes to making sure that adequate PPE kits are being used, right? Next, we have got hazardous waste processing or disposal. What happens is that if we don't have proper processes for actually managing, for actually handling these waste, what it results in, that sometimes these hazardous waste, they leak into the open environment, and then they become a source of disaster. Then there is induced effect of natural calamities. For example, let's say if we have got seismic activity, for example, we have got earthquake, or if we have got flooding in a particular area, if we have got such type of events, they can actually lead to the breakage of the pipes, industrial pipes, or sensitive equipments, which can again lead to the leakage of harmful gases. Then we have got terrorist attack or sabotage. Now this can be a deliberate attempt to basically inflict a damage on the country's resources, inflict a damage on the country's citizens, right? Now, what have been the major industrial disasters in India? The very first is the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984. Now, this actually took place in the Union Carbide factory, and it was because of the leakage of the methyl isocyanate, and it resulted into the loss of lives of thousands of people, and lakhs were permanently crippled. Then we have got the Chasnala mining disaster of 1975. Over here, a mine collapsed because of the fact that the methane ignited in a particular mine and it resulted into explosion, and then you had the collapse of the mine, and it resulted into the loss of more than 700 people, lives of 700 people, right? Then we had the 2009 Korba chimney collapse. In this particular disaster, what happened is that in a thermal unit, a chimney collapsed and it resulted in the loss of lives of 45 people, right? So what we see is that definitely we have got rules and laws in place, but still we are witnessing that so many industrial disasters are taking place across the country. Now, what are the legal and regulatory framework with respect to the disaster management in the country? The very first is the Explosive Act of 1884, the Petroleum Act of 1934, the Factories Act of 1948, and the Insecticide Act of 1968. What you need to keep in mind is that these four laws, they have specific provisions with respect to that particular industry, and they have general provisions so as to manage a particular disaster, so as to make sure that effective provisions are taken place, they are adequate safeguards involved in these industries. Now, one thing I would like to ask you here, that we have a particular organization, and that is Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization, PESO. Right, and this is a statutory organization which is basically linked to the Explosive Act of 1884 and the Petroleum Act of 1934. Now, you need to tell me under which department of the Government of India, and that is under which ministry and the department this PESO works. Do mention in the comment section. Next is the Environment Protection Act of 1986. This particular act, it gives the authority to the government, to the union government, to make sure that the industrial disasters are managed effectively. That is by actually giving out guidelines, and that has to be followed by different industries. Next is the Public Liability Insurance Act of 1991. Now, this particular act, it basically serves as a sort of cushion for the victims of the disasters, to provide them relief. Next is the National Green Tribunal Act of 2010. Now, this is for the effective and expeditious disposal of cases with respect to these disasters. Then we have got the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, this is a very comprehensive law which basically deals with all the aspect of disaster management, be it the pre-disaster or at the time of the disaster and the post-disaster management, right? Then, in addition to these laws, we have got certain rules which reinforce the actions of these laws. For example, we have got the Manufacture, Storage, Import of Hazardous Chemical Rules of 1989. Then we have got the Chemical Accident Rules of 1996. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that this particular rule is basically to deal with the accident with respect to the chemical accidents and to make sure that adequate preparedness is in place. Next, we have got the Hazardous Waste Rules. Then we have got the Gas Cylinder Rules. Now, again, the important thing is that the Government of India, through the National Disaster Management Authority, has placed certain guidelines, and these are the guidelines on the chemical disaster management. Now, these guidelines serve as it provides the overall direction to different ministries, to the state governments, to different bodies for effective disaster management in the country. Now, they are actually based on proactive and participatory approach, making sure that the process is multidisciplinary, the process is multi-sectoral. Then we have got the National Action Plan on the Chemical Industrial Disaster Management. Now, this NAP-CIDM, this basically serves as the overall architecture, and it provides the roadmap for the overall management of the industrial disasters in the country. Now, what should be the way forward? We already know that we have got adequate laws in place, but still what we are witnessing is that there have been frequent disasters, and they have claimed lives of so many people, and it has resulted into the loss of environment, loss of property, right? So what we see is that the very first aspect is that there has to be implementation and efficacy of laws. You have laws and rules in place, but what is needed is that there has to be adequate and robust implementation of these laws, be it at the state level, be it at the local level. Next is the buffer zones around the factories. There has to be a particular area around those factories which actually deal with harmful chemicals or harmful gases, so that the population which is actually adjoining these particular industries, they can be actually kept at bay with respect to these harmful chemicals. Next is regular safety drills and training. Now, this is a very important part, so as to make sure that the people around the industries, they have got adequate knowledge about evacuation, right? About timely evacuation. Then we have local population must be made aware. They must be made aware with respect to what kind of places they are living in, or what are the industries which are present in that particular area, and what kind of chemicals they are dealing with. Next, there has to be regular safety audits, and that too by the autonomous bodies. making sure that there can be, after the findings of the safety audit, there can be timely interventions. Next, retrofitting of industrial equipment and storage. Now, this is very important. Whenever you have safety audit, these safety audit can actually guide the proper retrofitting of these industries so that they are in a better condition to deal with natural calamities. Let's say the earthquake, let's say the flooding, right? So retrofitting is very much essential. So what we see is that industrial disasters in India, they are actually very frequent. They are actually occurring at a very fast pace, and that is actually claiming a life of a lot of people, and it is also leading to the loss of the environment, the property, and the infrastructure. So what is needed is a proactive approach. What is needed is that different stakeholders, they must unite and they must follow the adequate protocols and make sure that these laws are implemented in letter and spirit so that the lives of the people can be saved and the effects of these disasters can be minimized to the lowest possible extent, right? So that is what you need to know about this particular article. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains practice question. So the question says, in the recent times, India has witnessed grave industrial disasters which had serious consequences on human life, property, and environment. Discuss along with potential reform measures. Do write a particular answer on this question. So the next topic is with respect to the very serious social issue of glass ceiling. So what we have seen recently is that the former US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, she has referred the confirmation of Kamala Harris as the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party as something which is breaking one of the highest and the hardest glass ceiling. So we'll see what this concept of glass ceiling is all about and what are the way forward with respect to dealing with it. Now, this is a part of GS2, social issues and women. Now, what do we mean by glass ceiling? See, this is something which is used as a metaphor. Now, this refers to the unseen yet very real barriers which prevent certain groups of people from making a move in their career, from having career progressions. Now, what are these groups of people? See, generally when we talk about glass ceiling, we refer to the vulnerable sections, right, which include the women and also the minorities. Right. So don't think that glass ceiling is only with respect to the women. It is also with respect to the minorities. Now, the key aspect of glass ceiling concept are two. The first is that it is an intangible barrier. What do you mean by that? That there are no rules which actually prohibit the progression of these people. There are no rules, but these are intangible barriers. Then it limits the advancement of these people in terms of making a move in their career. So also you can just see in this image that what we see is that when it comes to the positions of power around the world, what we have is that in terms of the parliamentary seats, only 24% in the world, they are occupied by the women. Then we have got, in terms of the heads of the government, only 5% are actually taken over by the women, right? Next, we have got top billionaires, only 12% are actually attributed towards the women. Then the CEOs of different companies, right? So what we see is that only 6% are basically women, right? So what we have is that the situation is very skewed, and it is skewed in favor of men and it is against that of women. Now, what are the reasons for the existence of the glass ceiling effect? First is the stereotypes and biases. See, we live in a society where we have got preconceived notions in terms of what the roles of women are and what are the abilities of women, right? Also, there have been different studies, and very prominently we have got the Harvard's Business Review, which basically says that there are preconceived notions in the society which actually assume that women are less competitive and they are less assertive than men, right? Then we have got discrimination. So there can be overt or there can be subtle discrimination when it comes to the hiring or promotions or performance evaluation with respect to women, right? And it actually manifests in various forms such as unequal pay or lack of access to the mentoring roles, right? Or lack of access to adequate resources. Then we have got the work-life balance challenges. Now, we all know that women have actually a disproportionate share of domestic responsibilities. They have to manage the official work and also their responsibilities with respect to their homes, right? Now, this actually hinders their career progression and it limits their advancement, and it also limits the possibility of basically having good promotional aspects, right? Next, we have got lack of mentorship and sponsorship. So what we see is that these women, they have got fewer opportunities to connect with senior leaders who can actually guide them, who can provide them with adequate resources, right? Also, it limits their visibility and access to crucial career opportunities. So see, if we do not have role models in place, if we do not have women who can actually guide the other women to progress, or to make sure that they actually motivate them to actually be a part of the workforce, to make sure that they also contribute in the overall economic structure, then the situation cannot improve. So what we need is the adequate mentoring for these particular women, right? Now, what are the effects of the glass ceiling? The first is lost economic potential in terms of less wages, in terms of reduced career earnings. Even the global gender gap report also highlights towards this issue. Then we have got the gender pay gap, right? So for the same work, what we see is that women are getting paid less than men, right? So there is a pay gap, a huge pay gap. Also, we have got the World Inequality Report of 2022. Now, you need to tell me that which body actually publishes the World Inequality Report, right? So what this report says is that almost 72% of the earnings in the labor force, they were actually taken by the men, and only 18% was attributed towards the women, right? Next is underrepresentation in leadership positions. So once you have got less number of women in the leadership positions, it gives a negative implication for the organizational performance and its diversity. So you need to have women in the leadership roles so that they can actually be a voice for other women, right? Negative impact on the society. See, once you have got lesser women in the managerial positions, in the senior positions, what we see is that it would reinforce the gender stereotype in the society, and it would limit the potential of women. That is potential in terms of contributing to the overall economic progress of the country, right? Now, what should be the way forward? The very first should be challenging the stereotypes and biases. There have to be a proper awareness with respect to these stereotypes, and adequate attention should be paid, adequate measures should be taken in order to make sure that these stereotypes are actually destroyed. So we need to have unconscious bias training. There has to be proper training modules in different workplaces and different organizations, so that we can make people aware that yes, women are equally competitive and they have equal capacity to basically manage and carry out different tasks. More, what we need to keep in mind is that we need to create inclusive workplace so as to make the workplace more equitable. Next, enhancing the diversity and inclusion policies. So what we need to keep in mind is that different organizations, and that would happen once the government actually focuses upon this, different organizations should take various measures in terms of equal play, in terms of the flexible work and arrangements, for example, the creche facilities. Then we have got the mentorship programs. So there has to be adequate mentoring to these women, right? Next, providing mentorship and sponsorship to help women advance their careers and connect with senior leaders. Again, for the same thing. So as to they can have the adequate resources so that they can actually be guided appropriately for that specific particular domain, right? Then improving the work-life balance. There have to be flexible work arrangements for women, right? There have to be, as I said, the creche facility, right? There have to be childcare support and parental leave policies. Next, we have the measuring progress. That is, we need to have adequate metrics in place. For example, we have got the Global Gender Gap Report, which is published by the World Economic Forum. Now, these reports help the policymakers to make appropriate policy, right? To make appropriate policy interventions. So such measures, such metrics are really needed so that it can track progress on gender equality metrics. So what we see is that such glass ceiling effect, it is a very serious concern, and we really need to come out of this, and we need to make sure that equitable workplaces are provided for, equitable environment is provided for, so that the economy can benefit from the productive efforts of both men and women, right? So such way forward are needed, a multi-pronged approach is needed, and a collaborative efforts of different stakeholders is needed. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains practice question. So the question says, women across different fields still face the brunt of glass ceiling, which has numerous negative consequences. Highlight its causes and suggest potential reform measures. So do write a particular answer on this question. So the next topic is with respect to the geophysical phenomena of glacial lake outburst floods. So what we have seen recently is that the National Disaster Management Authority has finalized a list of 189 high-risk glacial lakes for mitigation measures. Now this actually shows the proactive role played by the government in order to mitigate the effects of these floods. Now this is with respect to GS1 Geography and GS3 Environment and Climate Change. Now, first is, what are these GLOFs? That is glacial lake outburst floods. See, Before that, we need to understand what is a glacier. So what we see is that a glacier is a river of ice, right? Now, once this glacier recedes, once it melts, it erodes the surface and it creates a depression, and that depression is filled with water, and that is where what we see is a glacial lake. Now, once a particular glacial lake breaches its capacity, the water overflows, then it can lead to glacial lake outburst floods, right? So these are the disaster events which are actually basically the abrupt discharge of water from glacial lakes, which result when there is an abrupt discharge of water. Now see, these glacial lakes, they are actually dammed by unstable ice or sediments. That is, they are actually, the boundaries are made up of the unconsolidated rocks, right? Very dry fragments, and they are not consolidated. When these boundary breaks, it results into a huge amount of water rush down, and this creates, its lead to the flooding in the downstream areas. This is actually referred to the Glacial event. So you can see that you have a particular glacier, right? Once it melts or recedes, what happens is that we have the formation of glacial lake, and this is what we see is a moraine, a terminal moraine. So what we see is a moraine, a terminal moraine is what? That it is on the boundaries at the end, right? And this is made up of unconsolidated rocks, debris. And once you have got the pressure of the water, sometimes these boundaries basically break. And once it breaks, the water actually gushes out. And then it leads to the flooding in the valley areas. Now, they can be triggered by glacier calving. What it means is, let's say if you have got a particular piece of ice and it goes down, it falls into the particular lake, then there can be breach of water. The water can actually sprout, it can come out, and then it can lead to the glacial lake outburst floods. Then it can also be because of the breakage of the terminal moraine. So as I just explained, that if you have these terminal moraines which are weak, if they cannot bear the pressure of the water, they would break, and once it would break, the water would gush out. Then it can also be because of the seismic activity. If you have got earthquake in this particular region, then it can lead to the flow of water outside. Now, these events, they unleash large volumes of water, sediments and debris downstream, and it results into the flooding of the downstream areas, the valley areas. And then it also leads to the destruction of the infrastructure, loss of lives of people, right? Now, why these glacial lake outburst floods are in the spotlight? The reason is that the Himalayan region, it has almost more than 7,500 glacial lakes. Right, so this region is very prone to these floods, and there has been an increase in the Glacial event. See, what you need to keep in mind is that this outburst floods, they are actually natural, but sometimes what is happening now is that because of the global warming, because of the human induced global warming and other reasons, what is happening is that their intensity and frequency is increasing, and that is leading to a basically loss of lives and other infrastructure. Now, what we saw in the October last year was that there was a particular Glacial event in the South Lonak Lake in the Sikkim, and it resulted in the loss of lives of many people. Almost 40 people died, right? What are the reasons attributed? As I said, that it is because of the soaring global temperatures, that is the climate change, human-induced climate change, and the second is the rapid infra development. See, particularly in the border areas, what we are witnessing is that there have been a lot of strategic projects which are going on, and that is actually creating a sort of instability in these areas, and that is resulting into the higher numbers of these Glacial events. What we also need to keep in mind is that a particular Nature journal, which is the Nature, it actually highlighted this and said that the southeastern Tibet and the China-Nepal border, these are the two areas which are more prone to these Glacial events. And it also said that almost 3 million people in India and almost 2 million people in Pakistan, they are actually they're at a huge risk because of these Glacial events. Now, what have been the mitigation measures which have been taken by the government? The first is the National Glacial Lake Outburst Floods Risk Mitigation Program. Now, this was launched on July 25th. Now, this program, basically, it focuses upon the technical hazard assessment, early warning systems, and monitoring, having the automated water level monitoring systems, right? So it focuses upon three aspects. The first is the technical hazard assessment, the second is the early warning system, and the next is the automated water level monitoring systems, right? Next, what we see is that the Central Water Commission, it has, with the help of the remote sensing, observed more than 900 lakes in the Himalayan region and has prepared a report on them. Next, we have got the State Disaster Management Authority in different states. For example, we have got the Arunachal Pradesh. Now, Arunachal Pradesh has through its state disaster management authority, has done a lot of work on this particular aspect. For example, in its area of Tawang, right? So expeditions are being carried out. Next, the NDMA. Now this, as this article says, that the NDMA has a list of almost 189 high-risk glacial lakes. Next, what we see is that scientific expeditions are being carried out in different states. For example, we have Sikkim, we have Ladakh, we have Jammu Kashmir, we have got Himachal Pradesh. So expeditions are being carried out. People are being made to go at the particular site and see what are the risks which are involved, right? To prepare a detailed report. Now, what are the measures which are required? First is that there has to be early warning systems, as the government is actually working upon. We need to have a robust early warning system so that we can have continuous monitoring of these glacial lakes. So as to measure, we can measure the water levels in these lakes. So as to we can make sure that whether the terminal moraines are capable of holding the water or not. Then what we need to focus upon is that these monitoring systems should be very robust. Adequate technical expertise should be given to these monitoring systems. Then structural measures should be there. That is, we need to construct dams or diversion channel so as to make sure that if we have excess water, we can divert it to the other locations. Building protective barriers or embankments so that whenever we have a weak boundary, adequate embankments can be made and then the lake can be secured. Then community preparedness is very important. What we need to keep in mind is that we need to develop and practice evacuation plans so that there can be timely evacuations. Then conducting public awareness campaigns. Very important. See, ultimately it is the local community which suffers. So the local community need to be given information. They need to be made aware with respect to the risks involved, with respect to the preparedness required. Then climate change mitigation. What we need to keep in mind is that different countries, for example, we have got the Paris Agreement. Different countries need to come together and need to make sure that we have a reduced greenhouse gas. Because see, once you have got greenhouse gases, it basically leads to the warming conditions and the glacier recedes at the faster pace. It melts at a faster pace. And once it melts, there is an increase in the water level and then it can lead to the Gulf events. Then there needs to be cooperation, that is strengthening regional cooperation among different countries. So as to make sure, now see, we have got the Himalayas. Now this is spread across different countries, Pakistan, we have Afghanistan, India, China. So there has to be a regional cooperation so that adequate teamwork effort can be made and we can make sure that these events, the risks are minimized. So what we see is that the Gulf events are a very serious risk to the life, to the property and to the environment. So adequate effort have to be there, multi-pronged approach has to be there, and the government is already working upon that. What we need to keep in mind is, what we need to focus upon is that we need to have adequate technical interventions and community participation so that the community at the ground level can be informed about the risks involved. So that is what you need to know about the glacial lake outburst floods. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains question. So the question says, the Himalayan region is prone to devastating glacial lake outburst floods as witnessed in the recent Sikkim floods. Highlight the measures taken to mitigate its effort and the additional efforts required. Also, we have got a prelims question. So the question says, with reference to the glacial lake outburst floods, consider the following statements. Glacial lakes are typically dammed by stable materials like ice, sediment composed of loose rocks and debris. Seismic activity can disrupt the fragile balance around the glacial lakes, leading to their sudden release of water. Intense and prolonged rainfall in the region can contribute to the rapid expansion of glacial lakes, increasing the risk of Gulf events. Which of the statements is or are correct? The first is for 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only, 3 only, none. So let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now the next topic is with respect to the religious conversions. So what we recently observed was that a man in Uttar Pradesh was arrested under the provisions of the Uttar Pradesh Prohibition of Unlawful Conversion of Religion Act of 2021, which basically bars the conversion through force or deception. Now this brings to the fore the debate surrounding the anti-conversion laws in the country, right? So we'll see what these anti-conversion laws are, whether they should be in place or not, right? Now this is with respect to GS2 fundamental rights. Now, what are anti-conversion laws? See, these are the legislative measures which prevent or prohibit religious conversions, right? And the aim of these laws is to prevent forced or induced conversions. See, please understand. If a person is converting to a different religion out of the spiritual awakening, out of the spiritual inclination towards that particular religion, it is perfectly fine. But if we have a particular person who is converting to a different religion out of the lure of money, or if it is a forced conversion, then that is something which should not be permissible. That is where these anti-conversion laws come in place, right? So what we see is that the conversions are fine if they're out of the spiritual inclination, but they should be prohibited if they are out of the lure of money. And again, the important point is that we have got certain vulnerable communities in the country, and these are the communities which are being targeted, which are being made to convert, and allegedly it is because of the funding from outside, right? Thus, this issue of conversion becomes really important. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that it was in the year 2015 that the Union Law Ministry very categorically said that the Parliament of India is not entitled to make a law with respect to the conversions. It is the states who are entitled. And therefore, we have got different states, more than 10 states in the country, who have enacted the freedom of religion statutes or laws, more commonly known as the anti-conversion laws. Now, how these anti-conversion laws violate the rights of citizens? The very first is Article 25. Now, we all know that Article 25 talks about the freedom of conscience and to freely profess, practice and propagate religion. Now, if we have a fundamental right which is giving me this right of freedom of conscience and to freely profess, practice and propagate religion, then any authority should not decide whether this religious conversion should be carried out or not, right? Next, we have got the fundamental right under Article 19 subclause 1 subclause A, that is freedom of speech and expression. Now, if a person is actually involving himself in a discourse with respect to a particular religion, if he wants to convert to a particular religion, then he should not seek the permission of the state. But over here, what is happening is that the state is actually seeing that whether the conversion is right or not. Then, right to privacy. See, please understand that we all know that it was in the year of 2017, in the very famous case of K.S. Puttaswamy, where the Supreme Court declared right to privacy as a fundamental right under Article 21, that is right to life and personal liberty. Now, a religion of a person is a very private affair. It's a part of the person's identity, right? So, if the state is interfering in this matter, if a person wants to convert to a different religion, then that is basically an infringement of the privacy of that individual. Now, before we talk about the other point, can you just tell me that which was the case in which the definition or the ambit of the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21, it was actually broadened by the Supreme Court, right? Where the due process of law was actually integrated in this Article 21, right? So do write in the comment section the name of that particular case. Then we have got Article 14, which talks about equality before law and equal protection of laws. What is being alleged is that these laws are aimed at particular minorities. They are targeting the minorities. Next, right to dignity, same as the privacy. See, religion is something which is a part of someone's dignity. And if the state is interfering in between, that is actually hurting the dignity of that person. Then we have got alleged suppression of minority, as I just talked about, that there have been allegations that these laws are just meant to basically suppress the minorities. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that the Supreme Court very clearly in the S. Pushpabai case said that, see, religious conversions are fine. There's no problem, provided that conversion has to be first voluntary, right? Voluntary. And second, it has to be sincere. It has to be voluntary, it has to be sincere, it has to be serious, right? Thus, what we need to keep in mind is that there is a need of anti-conversion laws. First, it prevents coercion and fraud. See, if you have people who are actually making others to convert to a particular religion out of the lure of money, or if it is a forced conversion, then it should not take place. So therefore, these anti-conversion laws help to make sure that this forced conversion and fraud is actually done away with, right? Next is preserving the social harmony. See, if we have frequent conversions in the society, that would automatically lead to more mistrust in the society, and it would then lead to the conflicts in the society. Next, protecting the cultural identity. Religion is something which is a part of someone's culture, right? It gives a person his identity, the cultural identity. Now, what happens is that if you have a group of people who are actually changing their religions, their identity, their cultures would also change. And then that would lead to the loss of the identity of that particular section of society, right? Address the national security concerns, very important. there have been cases where it has been found out that a lot of agencies outside the country, the non-state actors, and some of the entities who are against the India's interest, they are actually funding such activities in the country, right? So through such laws, what we can make sure is the national security is actually secured. Now, what have been the Supreme Court's views? Now, it was the very famous case of Hadia versus Ashokan KM, where the Supreme Court affirmed the right of the individual to marry the person of his choice and to change to the religion of his choice, right? Then it was the KS Puttoswamy case, as I just talked about, where the privacy was made as an integral part of the Article 21, that is the right to life and personal liberty, right? Next is the Lata Singh versus State of Uttar Pradesh. Now, in this particular case, the Supreme Court upheld the right of a person to marry a person of his or her choice, irrespective of the religion of that person, right? Next, the Sarla Mudgal versus Union of India. Now, in this case, what the Supreme Court said was that see, we are not actually prohibiting anyone from converting to any religion, but it should be made sure that if a person is converting to a particular religion, it does not mean that the person can evade his legal or moral responsibilities, right? So that is what the Supreme Court said. So what should be the way forward? There has to be a balance. That is a balance between the individual's right and the mala-fide conversion. See, mala-fide conversions are something which should not be allowed in the society. If the conversion is not out of the spiritual inclination or the spiritual awakening of that particular person, then the conversion should not be allowed, right? The conversion cannot take place on the basis of the lure of money or inducements. Also, what we need to keep in mind is, see, we have individual right? So all individuals have the absolute right to convert to any religion, but that should be based out of good intentions, right? So again, one more thing has to be kept in mind, that whenever you have these anti-conversion laws which are made by different state governments, adequate policy inputs should be drawn from different theologians, from different community members, so that these different religious communities don't feel that a particular religious conversion law or anti-conversion law is targeting that particular community, right? So adequate inputs should be there. So that is where the way forward is, that it has to balance the individual right, and also it has to make sure that no mala-fide conversions take place. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains practice question. So the question says, anti-conversion laws enacted by different states in India are fraught with various debates. Comment. So do write a particular answer on this question. So the next article is with respect to the Indian National Space Promotion Authorization Center, the New Space India Limited, and the Antrix Corporation. So what we are witnessing is that there has been an ever-growing participation of private entities in the overall space setup in the country. And what we are also witnessing is that the government is facilitating this through various policy measures. So over here, these three bodies become really important. Now, this is with respect to GS3, Science and Technology, awareness in the fields of space. Now, let's talk about these bodies. The very first is the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. See, this particular body was established to encourage the private sector participation in the space-related activities, right? And this basically regulates and encourages the Indian industry and startups, making sure that they have got adequate resources, making sure that their activities are carried out in principles, with respect to the principles or the guidelines which are given by the Government of India. Then it authorizes and oversees the space activities of the non-governmental entities. Make sure that those entities are actually carrying out their tasks in accordance to the guidelines. Then it also manages the sharing of space infrastructure and facilities, so as to make sure that the space resources, that these resources which the country has in terms of the technology, the satellites and other things, that is actually basically shared with different players, right? So that they can utilize it to the best possible extent. Then it also serves as a liaison between the ISRO, that is Indian Space Research Organization, and between private parties, so as to utilize in the best possible way, so as to utilize the resources in the best possible way, and to make sure that these private parties, they have adequate resources with them, they have the adequate expertise with them. Then it also evaluates the need of private companies, and then it forwards those recommendations to the government, and then the government comes out with the new policy guidelines. Next is the New Space India Limited. See, this is a body which is basically a corporate body, and it was established in the year 2019. It is completely owned by the Government of India. Now, this particular body works in close collaboration with the InSpace, right? And it makes sure that the needs of the private parties, they are actually being considered, right? Also, what it does is that it is the commercial arm of the ISRO, right? And it is involved in the vehicle production. Now we have got, for example, the polar satellite launch vehicle. We've got the small satellite launch vehicle. So it is involved in the production processes of these vehicles. Then space-based services. For example, we have got the remote sensing. For example, we have got the other satellites which are used for different communications. So it provides these services to different private entities. Then satellite development, as I just said, the different Earth observation satellites or communication satellites, they are also being manufactured with the help of the private entities through the New Space India Limited. Then it is also involved in the technology transfer. So whatever technology the ISRO has or other institutes which are associated with the ISRO has, it makes sure that those technologies are adequately transferred to the private entities. Then it also offers the consultancy services. That is, it provides the expertise with respect to different space-based activities. Then we have got the Antrix Corporation. Now, it's basically an old body, and it was established in the year 1992. The mission of this particular body is to promote and commercialize the space products, providing the technical consulting services, and transferring the ISRO developed technologies. Now, one very big confusion which exists in the minds of students is that what is the difference between the NSIL and Antrix? See, the major difference is, both are the commercial arms. Both deal with making sure that products and services of the private are sold to the private sector, right? There is technology transfer, adequate technology transfer. But what you need to keep in mind is that the difference lies is that the Antrix Corporation handles the ISRO's commercial deals with the foreign customers, and it is the New Space India Limited which deals with the domestic customers, right? So that is where the confusion lies, and this is the answer to this particular question, that the Antrix deals with the foreign customers, whereas the New Space India Limited deals with the domestic customers. So that is what you need to know about these three bodies, that is InSpace, NSIL and Antrix Corporation. So coming to the prelim snippet section, we have got the first topic as the SWIFT system. That is the Society for the Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. Now, please understand that this SWIFT system, it's a messaging platform, right? It's not something which actually transfers the money, but it is a messaging system. So always remember that. So it's a trusting messaging system, and it doesn't settle any of the money itself, but provides the instruction messages. So it only transfers the messages across different banks around the world, right? It is controlled by the central banks of the G10 countries, the European Central Bank and the National Bank of Belgium. It was established in the year 1973 and is based in Belgium. Now, there are about 11,000 member banks of this SWIFT, and almost in 200 countries that use the SWIFT system. Also, we have got the Indian banks which are associated, which are linked with the SWIFT system. So India's financial system has access to the SWIFT. Now, each bank which has access to the SWIFT system has a unique code, and it is on the basis of that code that there is a proper telecommunication, there is a proper message interaction between different banks. So that is what you need to know about the SWIFT system. This is in news with respect to the sanctions which are imposed on Russia because of its war against the Ukraine. So this becomes really important. Now, the next topic is with respect to the Fasal scheme. Now, this particular scheme of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, this is with respect to the crop estimation, right? It is involved in the crop cutting experiments, right? So the full form of this particular scheme is forecasting agriculture output using space, agrometeorology and land-based observation. Please understand that the government has been focusing upon integrating the technology with respect to the agriculture, and over here this particular scheme becomes important. The Fasal scheme is implemented by the Mahalanobis National Crop Forecasting Center, and the coordination and budget management is being done by the Division of Economics and Statistics Crop Forecasting Coordination Center, right? So this is something you need to know. Then the scheme has the partner agencies. First is the India Meteorological Department, obviously, in order to know what are the weather conditions. Then we have got the Institute of Economic Growth, New Delhi. Then we have got the Space Application Center for providing the remote sensing services. Then we have got the National Remote Sensing Center of Hyderabad. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that the government is making sure that we have got proper crop estimation in place. And over here, this particular scheme becomes really important. Next is the International Film Festival of India. Now, this is very important, and it was basically founded in the year 1952 under the patronage of the former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, and was organized by the Films Division, Government of India. Now, the very first edition of the event was held in Mumbai, which in subsequent years was shifted to different locations, that is Calcutta, Delhi, Madras, Trivandrum. Then in 2004, it was permanently shifted to Goa, and as of now, it happens annually in Goa. right? So it has become a competitive and an annual event which takes place in Goa, and the government of Goa and the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting jointly conduct this festival. Now it is the only film festival in South Asia that is accredited by the International Federation of Film Producers and Associations. So do remember that. The IFFI, that is the International Film Festival of India, aims at providing a common platform for the cinemas of the world to project the excellence of the film art, contributing to the understanding and appreciation of the film cultures of different nations. It basically makes sure that we have got the exhibition or the promotion of different films around the world, and then it basically gives different prizes, that is the best film or the best actors, right? So just you need to remember this. So the next topic is with respect to the fixed dose combinations. See, what are FDCs? You have got specific quantity of different drugs and they are mixed and then they are given as a single drug, right? So they are the combination of two or more active drugs in a single dosage form. Now, what is generally accepted is that the drugs should be given individually. They should ideally be not given in terms of the combination, right? They should be formulated as a single compound. But what is happening is that the FDCs are actually being marketed at a rapid scale, owing to some advantages it has, right? So FDCs are highly popular in the Indian pharmaceutical market and have been particularly flourishing in the last few years. Now, what are the advantages of these FDCs? First is the complementary mechanism of action. You have got a particular drug which is working on something, and then you have got the second drug or the third drug in that particular combination which is working on something else. So you have got complementary effect. It also has synergistic effect, right? Then better tolerability, elongated product life cycle management, and cost savings. Now these are some of the benefits. Rational approach for achieving the optimal therapeutic effect. So the effect which a person wants, which the doctor wants in a particular person, that is achieved through these FDCs, while minimizing the pill burden. So you need not to go for multiple tablets. You can only consume a particular tablet which has dosage of multiple drugs. Then what are the challenges? First is increased chances of adverse drugs effect and drug interaction. Let's say a person is suffering from a particular disease and he only needs a particular single dosage. But if he is consuming a fixed dose combination, he is also consuming a medicine for a disease which he actually doesn't have. So that is actually leading to the compromise of the health of that particular person, right? Then most pressing concern is with the irrational FDCs is that they expose the patient to unnecessary risk of adverse drug reactions. That is what I just told you. That if the person is not suffering with respect to a particular disease, he should not be ideally given that particular dosage in the FDCs, right? He should be given only that single drug. Irrational FDCs also impose unnecessary financial burden on the consumers. So you need to pay extra. So this becomes important because the government of India has actually put a ban on some of these FDCs recently, and that is where these FDCs become important. So that is for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. All the very best. Thank you.